Hey guys, it's Mr. Mini Painter here, and today I'm going to show you how I painted General Targg from the War of the Rohirrim expansion of the Lord of the Rings Middle-earth strategy battle game. Now that's a mouthful. I'm going to show you how I painted both those miniatures. There's a mounted one and there's one on foot. And I'm going to show you the one on foot first, as I'm focusing on the miniature, the character itself. And afterwards I'm going to show you how I painted the rest of the mounted details. So I hope this video is of any help to you guys, and if it is, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And let's get to painting now. So here are both models of General Targg, both on foot and mounted. I primed them with a black primer and added some modeling sand to the base, and we're good to go. I love the pose on this guy, really action-packed, pointing at his target. He is not a very colorful dude, but still quite interesting to paint. Afterwards we're going to be painting the mounted version, and I'm going to start with the one on foot because the colors of both characters, of course, are the same. Now, first color we're going to start with is Night Questor Flesh as a base tone for the skin. There is quite some skin showing on his arms, his hands, his face, and give that a good solid coat. Or better yet, a couple of thin coats. When painting a bright color on black is always quite difficult to get a solid color on there. And before continuing, you do not want to have any black shining through, because it's going to continue to build up in your next color range, and that's not what we want. Once we're done with this, we're slightly washing it with some Reikland Flesh Shade. Now, this General Targg has quite a tanned skin, so you could go a bit heavier on this, but the base color, the Night Questor Flesh, is already quite dark, so you don't have to overdo it. But make sure there's some nice shades over his skin, and especially in the places where they should be, so between the fingers, below the eyes, below the chin, below the nose, etc. In the next step, I'm mixing some Kislev flesh into the Night Questor flesh. I don't want to be too bright on him, so I'm going to remain with some dark tones in the mix. And what I'm first doing is outlining the brightest parts, so the eyebrows, the cheekbones, the forehead. Add some lines if you're able, some wrinkles in his head, his upper lip, the muscles, the fingers, etc. And afterwards, thin down your paint and kind of pull some of that paint from the darkest parts towards the brightest parts to get a nice transition in color. You might have to do that 2 or maybe 3 times to get the desired effect. And afterwards we're going to repeat this process by pure Kislev flesh. And you can see here the cheeks are a bit darker, but the cheekbones are quite nice and bright. The tip of the fingers, tip of the nose, don't forget the ears. And just slightly pull that paint towards where you want it to be the brightest, and leave some shades where they should be. Once done with pure palette witch flesh, I'm painting in the eyes. And make sure to have some dark edge around the eyes. If you don't have it already, just take some null, for example, and darken those eye sockets. And afterwards paint in that white of the eye so that really pops out. Then try and add a pupil if you can with Abaddon Black. And then it's time for the hair. Grey Seer I used, which is near white, which is what his hair is. And it's a nice base color. It's quite a solid paint, so you might get it in one cover, otherwise go twice. And remember, in the meantime, we are also painting the mounted version, so when mixing a color, make sure to use it on both. It just is so much faster. Now once this is dry, I'm using Apothecary White on the hair. And the reason I'm using Apothecary White is because it's a bit brighter and more soft than, for example, Nuln Oil. You might thin Nuln Oil down and get a similar result, but this Apothecary White is one of my favorites. Afterwards, I'm going over it with Grey Seer again, just to pick out those brightest pieces of hair, so in the front, on the top, and leave some of that darker part shining through. And basically that's it for the hair. Next step is the cloth beneath his armor with Nightlord's Blue. A nice and dark start. On the original box art he is quite bright, the blue he's wearing, and we're going to build up to that. So for the next step, I'm using some Tactless Blue into the Nightlord's Blue. Mix that and pick out those top folds, the parts where the light would bounce off, and leave some of that dark shining through. And once this is done, we're going to pure Tactless Blue for an extreme highlight, just on those edges and the very middle points of the folds. Next, with some Storm Vermin fur, I'm painting the entire armor. Just go over everything, we're going to darken it down later on and get those details back. For now, I'm going for a nice coverage of the entire piece. That includes the part on the chest. Now before continuing shading and highlighting, I'm adding some Abaddon Black to the Storm Vermin fur to get a slightly different base color for the pants below. It's a bit darker but made of more or less the same color. Next, I'm painting the entire cloak with a mixture of Incubi Darkness and Abaddon Black. I like mixing down colors with Abaddon Black because then you can use the original color as a highlight of its own. You get some subtle highlights that way. Now in this next step I'm using Nuln Oil to cover all of the previously painted armor, so that includes the robe, but also the chest and waist armor. And that way we're getting those nice details, the stitches and all that stuff back. You can now see that the pants is darker than the rest of the armor, but still fits together very nicely because we used the same color scheme. For the fur on his shoulder, I'm using Grey Seer as a base color, and we're going to approach that the same way as we did the hair. Once this is drying, I'm going back to Incubi Darkness to paint in some nice lining on the cloak, and as I said before, because it's in the original mixture, this blends together really well. When wet it might seem a bit bright, but when it's drying it's a very, very subtle color change, and I want the cloak to remain quite dark, so don't have too much sharp, bright edges. Of course you can if you want, but I wanted him to be a dark character. Now with pure Stormwind fur, I'm picking out the details on his armor, and with that null oil now really dried, those details really pop out. There's some stitching, and I also gave it a edge highlight on the entire side of the armor. Pick out some of those wrinkles on the pants as well. And that's it. Next, with some dried bark, I'm painting in all these straps and leather parts. There is quite some on his chest, a belt, and also some below the arm armor. And there's also these leather bands around his legs, going up to the boots, which I also painted in the same color. As with the hair, I'm going to use Apothecary White on the fur on his back as well. Get a good solid coat over it so you bring out those details, but still keep it bright. Don't forget the small side on the front here. Then with some Ushabti bone, I'm painting the very bright shirt that is showing just underneath his armor. It's a short piece of cloth, but it adds to a nice light detail to this miniature. Of course, that is visible on both sides. I'm shading it with some Seraphim Sepia to really yellow it down. Then with some Baneblade Brown, I'm edge highlighting all the leather parts and straps that we painted before. I also painted the grip of the sword with the previous brown color and highlighting that with Baneblade Brown as well. Then with some lead belcher, I'm painting some tiny metal details here. There are some rings holding the straps together and some buckles and clasps. There are two large rings holding the cloak to the straps on his chest. We're going to paint them later on. I'm giving the arm pads here a nice edge of metal, leaving the inside black. Next, with some Mechanicus Standard Grey, I'm painting the padding below his arm pads here. Next I'm adding a very subtle glow with Griff Charger Grey, which is a nice blue hue, to the arm protection here. That gives it a dark metallic look, or leather. It could go for both actually, but it's nice to have a bit of color in the black. You don't have to go easy here because it kind of blends with the black background, so if you want the color to show up, you have to be a bit more solid with your paint. In the next step, we're painting the rings we mentioned before with hashut copper. It gives it a nice extra color detail to this mini. I decided to pick up the cloak just a tiny bit more by adding some palette witch flesh, just a tiny bit, to the incubi darkness. We're focusing just on the edges and the sharpest parts of the folds. So for example here, pulling towards the ring, that should be crispy. Now there is a piece of the sword showing here, which I painted with lead belcher as well. There is some straps just around this sword piece, and then I painted that with some Baneblade brown. And once that is absolutely solid and dry, I'm washing it with some Agrexor shade to get those nice details and shapes back. And of course, once this is dry, we're going to be highlighting that a little bit more with the original Baneblade. I'm using Baneblade on the base as well. Just slap it on, don't be too precise, but give it a bright brown color, as we're going to be washing that with a contrast paint later on. And once this is dry, I'm using Garagak Sewer as a contrast paint to go over it, and you see those nice light brown parts shining through, so you get a nice instant shaded or highlighted base, really resembling a sandy look. And next we're continuing on the mounted version. So with General Targg done, also on the horse, it's time to continue painting the horse itself. I'm using a dry brush and mixing some Abaddon black into Rhinox hide and kind of go over the entire horse. Don't care too much about the details here. We're going to paint over the tail, hooves and straps, etc. later on. Just slap that on the outside of the horse, leaving the inside a bit darker. We get this nice, very subtle brown look now. Now we're going to pick that up even more by using pure Rhinox hide, and we get a nice brown mount. With Rockhard Flash, we're painting the socks, so to say, of this horse. And just pick out those details. There's some of this hair dangling behind the hooves. I'm painting that with the same color as well. Once this is done, I'm washing this with some Cygor brown, which is also a contrast paint and really blends those colors together with the skin tone or fur tone, I don't know what it's called, of the horse itself. Make sure that the front remains nice and bright, otherwise go over it afterwards. And the hair can be a bit mixed, flowing into the original brown color. Now pick your rock hard flesh out again and make sure that those fronts are nice and bright, and you can pick out some of those hairs. Now the manes and tail of the horse are black, but it's nice to highlight that with a bluish hue, and for that I'm using Dark Reaper and a large dry brush again. I'm just going over those manes of the horse, and you give it a nice blue tone like this. Also with the War of the Rohirrim, of course, we're using slightly different colors than you would in a normal miniature of Middle-earth, so colors are allowed here. And when highlighting the blue, I'm using Fenrisian Grey to pick that out even more. So it gives it really that cartoony look that the movie also had. It's like a very specific style that the film was in as well. Now all the straps around the horse I painted with Corvus black, a nice matte black, like a really dark grey actually. That really works with the darkness overall on this mini. And there's a lot of bands going all over the horse, holding his armor together, the reins he's holding, the saddle of course. All held together by these bands. There is a piece of this fur beneath the saddle, which I decided to paint with the same approach as we did the cloak and the hair, so grey cedar as a base. I think General Targg was very picky in animals, and he decided to just use one for everything, his clothing, his saddle. I'm using dried bark for the saddle. Now with some null oil, I'm darkening the details on the horse's head, especially around the eyes and some of those deeper parts here, so really separating the shape of the head from the neck. Next, with Apothecary White, there it is again, I'm painting the fur on the back of the horse, beneath the saddle. Then I'm using some Agrax Earthshade to shade all the leather parts of the saddle, giving it a nice dark, weary look. And then with some Dark Reaper, I'm edge highlighting all the reins and straps on the horse. Just like the tail, adding some color to an otherwise quite dark mini. and subtly highlighting some of those details on the horse. I'm using pure Abaddon black on the hooves. Don't forget the bottom. And the horseshoes with pure lead belcher. And also here, don't forget the bottom. I'm also using lead belcher to paint all the buckles, straps and details on the horse's head armor here. But also all the rings on the entire horse, holding the straps together. Then there is a tiny piece of cloth dangling here, and I'm using pure Fenrisian grey to paint that. It's quite a bright piece of armor, but I wanted to remain close to the original box art, so why not? I'm shading that with some Drakenhof Nightshade to focus on the blues. Now, I thought it was already bright enough without highlighting this further on. Then we have this final piece lying on the bottom here, the helmet, the Rohan helmet, and I'm using lead belcher to paint that. Once you're done with this, we're going to continue on the gold details, and for that I'm using Retributor armor. Just pick out those gold edges. But remember, it is a worn helmet, it's a soldier that has been defeated, so it can be a bit dulled down. I'm covering the entire helmet with some Agrex Earthshade as to create that effect. A bit of a dirty, worn look. And it's been lying on the floor in the sand. And final detail, of course, the sword he's holding, pure lead belcher. And we're going to give that some sharpness by using Stormhost Silver. And you can pull that in a way opposite of the direction of the sword. So when the sword goes up vertical like this, you pull some horizontal lines and the other way around. And that way you get some sharpness in there. So you just pull them sideways like I'm doing here. And you get that really sharp look as if it has been sharpened for a couple of times. And it's kind of uneven, but really sharp. Now, the way this works best is when using as little paint as possible. And there's the final result for General Targg, both on foot and mounted, looking awesome, dark, and ready for battle. Now, if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to my page, because I'm making a lot of new movies every week. And if you're into this kind of stuff, I also have a Patreon page where I am painting a lot of different games. So please check that out as well if you're interested. I'd love your support. So thank you so much for watching for now, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Bye bye!